Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another week of Growing with my fellow growers. I'm joined, as always, by an amazing panel. I'm going to pass it over first this week to Spartan Grown.
Thanks, Jack. I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word, no spaces. And if you don't do Instagram, you can also shoot me an email. That's probably the best communication towards me nowadays is email, spartangrown@gmail.com. My Instagram is starting to get full or something because I'm not getting all the messages anymore. So I apologize if you send me messages on Instagram and I miss them, but those are the two modes of communication I have right now. If you have any questions on organic or synthetic growing cannabis, I can hopefully help you out.
Happy to have you back. Next up, Dr. MJ.
Hey,
There you go.
as soon as I need to unmute my mic, it's like it never wants to cooperate. Anyways, I'm Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. I'm excited to be here on the show. I missed last week. There was like as somebody said, a sports ball thing happening last week. So I'm happy to be back this week. I had a little YouTube premiere today for a new video, so I've been hanging around YouTube, and yeah, let's get on with the show.
Happy to have you back. And next up, Matthew Gates.
Hey everyone, this is Matthew Gates, IPM specialist, but most of you know that, and I'm excited to talk more. I don't know what the topic is today, but nonetheless, chat has been on fire, so I look forward to that.
Great stuff as always. And next up, we've got Noah the Grower. Welcome back.
How's it going, everybody? Yeah, like Dr. Coco said, there was the Super Bowl on. I'd placed a decent sized wager on the Chiefs for the season started, so I was happy they won. But yeah, I'm Noah the Grower. You can find me on Instagram and here with everyone else.
Cheers, Noah. Happy to have you back and happy that that bet paid out. I imagine if you took it at the beginning of the season, the odds were probably a little bit, more stacked. So you probably got
8-1.
That's pretty solid. Good payout for you. So happy for you there. And next up, we've got the American one.
Hello, Jack Panel and everyone in chat. I am the American one on YouTube and the American one _with _Ekeens on the IG. If you want to hit me up, ask me anything. And yeah, it's good to be here again. I hope everyone had a great week and weekend and looking forward to another good week. So yeah.
Well, recently I got a good DM from a longtime listener, Brian 420 PM, I think is the Instagram name. He is a data analyst or former data analyst, and he reached out to me with just some interesting information in regards to some of the nutrient companies and the high levels of EC that they're pushing. And I'm actually happy Doc is back with us this week because I kind of think of tonight as like the race to the top, so to speak. And as the cheap home grow, my thought has always sort of been like the race to the bottom, because as little as I could give the plant and get it to be healthy and successful to harvest, that's the best for me, because then I'm spending less money on nutrient. But what I've seen recently is like, whether it's Jungle Boys or certain nutrient manufacturers, a lot of them are recommending extremely high EC, like double, triple, quadruple what I would say on Coco for Cannabis or other websites that I recommend people follow, because in my experiences, they've had lots of success with those lower numbers. So I'll try and search for the post and maybe pull some of that stuff up, but I'm going to pass it to Dr. MJ and ask kind of, what are your thoughts on seeing either nutrient companies or growers, whether it's on Instagram or commercially, wherever, pushing these really high, I'm talking like 3-4 EC, and maybe even sometimes higher numbers?
I mean, we just have a lot of research in basic horticultural science that lets us know that those ECs are counterproductive to plant health and plant nutrition in general. You can train plants to tolerate pretty high ECs if like that's what you're into doing. And some farmers have to do that, frankly, because they're like trying to irrigate with salty water or other issues like that. So there's been quite a bit of research that goes on into sort of the EC limits for effective agricultural production. And for reasons totally unrelated to plant nutrition or trying to force feed phosphorus or whatever else is that they think that they're doing, just simply having an EC that high puts unnecessary stress on your plant. And yeah, I don't think there's sort of much rigorous science to back that up. But again, you can train cannabis plants to be able to tolerate pretty high doses and then become convinced that that's sort of the secret to success. It's a lot easier, I think, to be consistent and productive at lower levels that really take into consideration both the fertilization needs of the plant and the sort of osmotic need for water of the plant as well.
All good points. And to my understanding as well is in other horticulture and agriculture, it's a fairly well understood ranges, at least for, maybe different plant sizes or different types of plants. I do feel like some plants are maybe a little bit heavier feeders versus other plants that are maybe lighter feeders, but can you speak to that at all? Is that
well, there's two issues. So there's the feed issue, but that's different than the EC issue per se. I mean, and they're related, certainly. Like the amount that we can quote unquote feed, or the amount of nutrients that we can provide is limited by the EC number. But the EC number is a limit for reasons unrelated to nutrition. So this is usually studied in the context of irrigating with saline water, and sort of what is the limit of that for different crops and breeding crops to be able to tolerate certain salinities in the water, because plants need to absorb that water through osmosis. And if it's salty or has a high electrical conductivity, what we're measuring there basically is how salty it is. If it's salty, it makes it really difficult for the plants to absorb that water through osmosis. So that's one of the sort of key factors that you start really pushing at when you start raising EC above 2. You really put stress on the plants to be able to absorb water that's that salty. Water, like natural sources of water that are above an electrical conductivity of 2, are considered unsuitable for agriculture.
You ready for this, Doc? I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to hurt science's feelings with this Athena Pro line suggestion. So let me, this is a screenshot courtesy of Brian 420 PM, but it was shared via Athena's page. So you can go and find this Athena Blended Pro. Are y'all seeing this? Just the browser here?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is week 1, week 2, week 3 of flower, and he was commenting, why is there a 4.0 EC higher than input? Because he was talking about, he thinks that input should be closer to the runoff. So they're saying input EC 3.0, runoff target EC 6.0 to 7.0.
Well, first of all, that's what happens when you go in with too hot water. I mean, there's more nutrients than the plant's going to take up in a situation like that. That's what leads to the buildup. What leads to the 3 to become a 6 is that the plant is taking out the water faster than it's taking out the nutrients there. I mean, and it's struggling to do that. And that's driving up your EC number. You'd have to fertigate very frequently to keep that down. I mean, this is one of the reasons that we fertigate frequently, but this is nonsense, man. Going in at 3 and coming out at 6, you can grow plants a hell of a lot faster if you keep them like at 1.5 the whole time. Going in even at like 1.2 and coming out at 1.5. I mean, that's what we try to hit. And that's why I like it, a lot of people have started growing like I do, right? Because it works really effectively, like keeping them in that tight range. Having that kind of a swing between, from 3 to 7.
I hardly even know how the plants are
really
alive.
Yeah, no plant is able to absorb water really much at that level of electrical conductivity. So
I liked the metaphor we used last time, or maybe I said it, or some of us, we kind of agreed. Roots are like the lungs of the plant in a way, getting those nutrients in, if we want to use that metaphor. And if you have I really liked how you put it, Dr. Coco. It's kind of like, it's like if we extend that metaphor, it's like they can't breathe. It's like there's no air to breathe. Yeah. You gotta put more air into the atmosphere. It's like living really high up on a mountain, or living or being in a confined space, and the air is just getting too carbonic and there's no oxygen anymore. It's like you gotta put in. They're struggling. I really liked how you put that.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to be struggling for water.
Is there a flush?
And showing
fee
wilting
schedule?
signs. I can't imagine you have a plant in 7 EC without that plant showing wilting signs. I mean, it's just not going to be able to get water. at
This
that
is a
level.
really great example, I think, of like the 1,000-mile stare on this thing is like, beware official charts. Will put quotes on that. Beware official charts from the people selling you the product. This is somebody who's selling. Athena is the nutrient company. They're the ones selling the nutrient. Of course, they benefit by telling you to use more of it.
They're almost certainly going to be telling you to do a weekly or a bi-weekly flush with numbers like this too.
Yeah, because they're
Yeah, is it
keeping
in
it
the
so
schedule,
full.
Jack? Do you see it?
That was not ever included anywhere. You guys looked at the exact same information that I was
Okay.
just showing. That was the full information. And then when
They never talk about a flush.
Brian followed up and he was talking to somebody and they're like, this is a tale as old as time. And they're basically like disregarding his concern about such high ECs. And Athena has high dryback, but I think that they're giving some sort of other maybe like acid to help with the it's either enzymatic cleaner to strip the root ball of the buildup is what he's saying.
Using
Athena
like
has
it's I think
like
it's called
cleanse, Athena cleanse or
bariatric.
something?
Yeah, cleanse is a bariatric
Ah.
acid or similar to like a hydrogen peroxide.
Is that mixed in with all the water?
Yeah, it's mixed in at 2 milliliters all the time, every watering, no matter when you are in the plant. It's like a base. Like for what's that root drench that people or that they used to use to like like UC roots, like you use it just to keep the roots from growing bacteria, kind of a thing. It's just
Beneficial on bacteria, or it's
it's
activating?
not beneficial. It
oxygen, or-
destroys it's an oxidizer. It just
Yeah, okay.
destroys all bacteria. Bariatric acid, I believe, is what it is. We could probably look up cleanse.
Okay.
he says
Periacetic
Athena has a
acid?
third option, which is called
Maybe
cleanse.
periacetic. I think you're right,
I
Matthew.
think you're right. Yeah.
You know, the other thing, when the EC swings that much, regardless of sort of the level, but it's more than doubling during the course of whatever events between inflow.
Well, and that cleanse
runoff.
is making you dump your nutrients literally down the drain. So like they're recommending you use tons of nutrient, and then they're recommending a product that will strip your root ball of that nutrient. So you literally just flush it down the drain.
It is kind of a waste, huh?
It's a major way. This is the Cheap Home Grow podcast. I mean, if you can
Yeah,
get away
big
with
waste.
using less,
It's neither cheap nor
successfully.
home nor grow.
It's a big waste, but basically there's been pretty good nutrients for doing organic, fertigation or DWC or other, hydroponic methods for growing plants. That's not really new. What's new is there's all sorts of cannabis companies that are trying to enter into this space and sort of convince you that they've got some special product designed specifically for cannabis, and it's going to be sort of better because they're from someplace where cannabis is famous, or they are marketing it directly towards cannabis or whatever. And in my experience,
The Dutch
across
were-
this market, they're inferior products sold at elevated prices that really you end up, it's specifically, and I've said this on this show before, one of the things that I caution against is nutrient companies that recommend high electrical conductivities. That's usually a sign that their nutrient blend isn't well made. Basically, they have to give you a pretty high electrical conductivity in order to deliver all of the various nutrients that you need in the appropriate ppms. That's sort of where the difference is between EC and ppm, to be honest with you. When we're dosing nutrients and thinking about your plant's nutrient needs, you want to think about that in ppms of individual nutrients. But when we're measuring EC, or when we're measuring ppm with a meter at the end, it's like the total. It's not like how much is nitrogen, how much is calcium, how much is phosphorus, all of that. And so we're not really, that number that we measure when we're just measuring the total water, it's not about nitrogen, calcium, and potassium and all that. We're measuring it to make sure that the plant's going to be able to drink, and it's pretty consistent to the water that it's been in before. Because a plant that's adjusted to 2000 EC, it sort of wants it to stay at 2000. If it shifts down to 500, then it's going to have to work to sort of adjust to that. And if it goes up from there, it's going to have to work to adjust to that too.
Yeah, that homeostasis adjustment's like a major stress factor. And like, why would you pile that up on it? And always ask this other question: why are they talking to you? Why are they trying to sell it to you through like an Instagram advertisement or something?
or a very
like
like a not so obvious, like Brian was saying, a guy that I have respect for, and I've referenced their guides and stuff in the past. Green Jeans Garden, he's saying, is using Athena, but they're recommending a dry back and going as high as 2.7 on the EC. And then Jungle Boys, if you watch the Jungle Boys walkthroughs, like a lot of people do, the Canacribs. I just saw somebody post a photo of Spartan Grown on Canacribs at Mint Canico from a while back, but people watch these things, and then a lot of people put a lot of credence into it because they see a professional facility, lots of money
Right.
worth of lights and all this stuff, and they see these guys are the professionals. They must know what they are doing. Well, they are also often sponsored by the nutrient company directly. They have discount codes with their name on it, which will get you 5, 10, 20, however much % off. And that being said, they can afford to dump as much of that nutrient on there because they're getting it for free or extremely
Yeah.
deeply discounted.
Yeah.
So then they can walk you around their facility and say, oh yeah, we're growing at this, but they're not showing you the EC meter. So when Jungle Boys are saying, oh yeah, we're doing 4 EC in and 7 EC out, I've never actually looked at the EC meters on those things. They're just walking around with some guy saying that. And so there's financial motives that we need to be aware of. And the other thing, Doc, you said ppm matters when you're worrying about each individual nutrient. And the reason you use EC so often and never really have to even mention that is because you've done the vetting. You have a proper nutrient line that has an NER, nutrient element ratio, which is proper for cannabis and other plants to grow them without having to go with a 4 EC. I have recommended 1.5 EC to so many people, hundreds of growers at this point, multiple hundreds. And every single time they get their EC down to that level, keep it there consistently, keep pH roughly in range, and just get their watering more consistent. The plants green right up, get healthier, and start growing faster and have way less issues.
Every single time you lower the EC on a plant from like 2 something down to 1.5 or 1500 like that, every single plant is going to be visibly happier the next day. It's going to be like, oh, I'm a happy plant now. Yeah,
People
I
think
totally
that I have
agree.
some secret formula, but it's like, really, they did the thing. They got it to where it needed to be. It's just that before they had a misguided target. Like if you're aiming over here, your target's over there, you're going to be hitting that target, but it might not be a good target. So if you give them a proper range, then it really can help them pretty easily. Like I think a lot of people, Coco, they call it hydro on training wheels sometimes. Like I've heard people use that as like an insult
I've heard you
against
use
Coco
that. This is funny.
in the earlier days. And to be honest, I think a lot of people that used to say that switched from their DWC system or their NFT, their nutrient film technique or whatever they used to have to Coco. And they're like, oh wait, this shit actually yields great. It tastes awesome and it grows really fast. And there's like, if my power goes out, my plants just don't die in 12 hours. So there's lots of benefits. Like Loki Grow is one that I think of. He's a New York guy, I believe. And he had a bunch of DWC tables, but he has a whole room. I think it's like for breeding and just experimental growing, but of cocoa, and he gets success out of it. So.
The other thing is I really believe that we drain less water to waste than DWC grows do. I mean, every time you change out your DWC tanks, it's such a big nutrient dump. I never sort of run off that much water, like during the whole course of a grow, I'll run off less water than somebody running DWC will produce in one sort of tank change. So that's another side to it. That's actually one of the reasons that DWC isn't more broadly adopted in commercial production. It's a lot more water.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I just speaking from personal experience, just to add a little bit of anecdote to this more empirical, switching sides here, but I knew somebody who my understanding was that the reason why they were able to obtain the rank that they did in the company was because they were able to make their costs go down through the relationship with like a nutrient line manager or something. They're able to make the money go down. That was the important thing. It wasn't just purely the economics of that, not thinking about the greater effect that has, the eutrophication that damages the outside property or the pipes and wherever they go down the drains and wherever the gutters release to. Any of that stuff, it doesn't really matter. None of those consequences, they're very rarely they're really put into the system, or at least the effects of those, the ramifications are not really priced in, as they say, right? And so that's just really unfortunate. I also like DWC, but I agree with Coco with Dr. Coco in that it's not really economical in a lot of cases. And it would be great if some of that water can be routed through some system, and some people can do that. Some people have ideas for that, and I'm really here for it. Not saying that that can't be done, but yeah, that's a real, as I call, a virtual resource. It's there, but not really. Like when you grow in California, you grow all these plants, and then the water gets taken up and then transported outside. That water doesn't come back, right? There's nutrients that are taken out, so they don't come back. So you had to reapply them, or you had to re-amend them, or something.
I can't remember how he claimed to do it. Maybe I don't know what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was Weedner DWC. And I think that he had a way of minimizing the water use, or just doing a really good job about recycling it, or using like their water from the dehumidifiers as a water source and things like that, to because they love DWC, I believe, and that's the method that really
I
works
mean,
well
and
for
I
them.
think you can pull it off. It's hard to scale it and make it efficient sort of in larger scale situations. It ends up being a lot more work. And that's why like sort of the vast majority of commercial cannabis facilities are now using Coco. It's just easier, more sustainable, and more scalable system to set up.
There's a beautiful commercial setup. I think it's called like the Altitude Ranch, and they have the reverse DWC system, and I think it's called Current Culture H2O. And I definitely think I agree with you, Doc. It's harder to scale for sure, but some people have done it, and it is kind of cool when they run through their like thing and they're
Yeah,
just
I've
chopping
heard
these
that.
monster plants, and they pull out these huge root balls that are like basketball size plus, and it's just like
See,
pure
that's
white
the other
roots.
thing. DWC does encourage you to sort of larger plants and longer veg time, sort of because you want to grow larger plants. Although you can do sort of sod grows in DWC, they're a little bit harder to manage because you're running multiple plants in tubs. But
Yeah, and like we were
anyways,
talking about earlier, like we've had planned power outages here for like maintenance and stuff on the grid, and my plants being in earth box, for example, where there's soil with water below it, power goes out. I mean, it's not the end of the world. They sat for the whole 12-hour period and didn't even bat an eye. But if they were in a DWC system, I'd be panicking. And so
Yeah.
that's a major game changer for, not even just like going from DWC to any other form of hydro, but there's lots of other options out there that could be more forgiving in that regard.
Yeah. I was talking to a grower up north recently, a hydro grower, about this issue. I can't remember. I don't think it was Weed Nerd, but they were talking about how long they can go just because their reses are cool. So that's the other thing. If you do, I thought I wanted to bring that back into the show. If you do hit that situation, DWC growers out there, where your air pumps turn off because you've hit a power outage, get your water temps down. That's sort of the other thing that you can do to potentially help you. Like float some frozen water in there, float some frozen water bottles or something else to sort of keep that water temperature down, because water will stay, the oxygen that you have will stay a lot better if you can keep the water temperature in the 60s.
I agree with Doc, but if you have a hard time and can't do that, what can help too is going the route, kind of taking it back to our beginning conversation. Products like Cleanse, the chemical route of sterilization can help you in that situation too.
H2O too, yeah.
Yeah,
Hydrogen
H2O2
peroxide.
is a classic one.
Yeah. But yeah, keeping it as cool as you can, draining it off. I mean, if you're in a DWC, to drain 3/4 of it off, then if you're going to be sitting for more than a couple of hours, and expose most of the roots to air, just leave like the tips of the roots dangling in the water. But yeah, you're kind of up against the clock.
Earlier when we were talking about the whole cleanse thing, I used to use Heavy 16, and they had a product called Finish, but it would be given at like 1 mil per gallon for like the whole entire grow, and then like at the flush you'd give it like 15 or 20 mils per gallon or something like that. There was also Roots, which was given like 1 mil per gallon, and I think it just helps prevent some of those things that can cause root issues, whether root rot or other pathogens and things like that. Trying to
Could just be a surfactant or a wetting agent too. They're often
Yeah.
sort of dosed like that, right? Where you give a little bit each watering, and then a lot of it basically acts like a flush.
I think that Cleanse might have been one of those acids. If I looked into it, it was like a soluble potash or something, but I think there's other stuff that's hidden in the paperwork behind it. And the roots was basically their version of whatever that popular, like the monosilicic acid, the more expensive one. Everybody uses like this one product, but
Power SI.
yeah, Power SI is the one that a lot of people I think use. But I think a few nutrient lines have like made that bottle part of their line as their like roots thing. Did I hear Noah the grower there for a second, or was somebody else
Yeah,
trying
I
to
was just gonna say, didn't you? I thought I remember you saying a while back that you liked that heavy 16 line, or you thought it was decent. Is what I remember you
I
saying.
think it made great flavor. Like every single harvest had amazing flavored buds. Like once I got the fuller line, I think there was something called Prime, and I think that was more of like an organic. It had like a humic acid, and every time I put it in there, I could see it like in the water, like get really dark, and it had a kind of rich smell to it. But just like the Veg AB, I feel like was kind of like a pretty standard hydro line. But when I hate to say like, oh, when you added the more bottles, it actually did better. But I maybe it was just my own freaking. It probably was.
No, I think so, Jack. I haven't used it, but I was talking to a rep one time and I just was asking him, I'm like, what is, tell me about your line. And I said, is it organic? And he's like, well, kind of. I'm like, I laughed at him. I'm like, what do you mean kind of? And so what it was the bases, like just like you said, man, like so the A, B, and I think there was a third bottle. That was your straight basic salt base, but all the additives were organic based. So then came your humics and your microbes and but all the other things additives were all organic based. So
Funny enough,
Yes.
on Grow Diaries, I got labeled organic when I was growing with Heavy 16, and I didn't put myself in the organic category. They like shifted it there because how Heavy 16 had marketed and pushed their stuff. But like when I dug into it, I actually called and talked to them on the phone. They're like, yeah, we just haven't paid for the organic certification because it's a process to go through, and we don't actually care to because, like you were just saying, the AB is more of a base synthetic hydro line, where the additives are more of an organic base, but they play well together. And I was at the time getting free compost tea every Wednesday and Sunday from a hydro store, and that had other stuff in it as well. So I think that it was more of like some people call it synganic. I had a little earthworm castings that I was throwing in there occasionally. But it worked great. I can't complain other than the price, the price of the system. And I've had amazing stuff grown by Dr. MJ from, I believe what's it called? It's just the 3-line, the trio, right? The
GH.
GH. I could be wrong, but and Jack's 321 is another one out there that's very simple line. A lot of people grow with it and grow fire. I really believe the genetics and the cultivation is a much more large player than the thing that's fed to the plant oftentimes. So
Hey, maybe we'll see like what they do with like some wheat and grass breeding and make them more resistant to saline water. maybe that'll be the
some would argue this has
that's
happened with
one way you
cannabis
could
already.
go, I guess.
Because all of the Dutch seed banks were, having to sell stuff that wouldn't hurt them
Perhaps.
underneath the conditions of people like Dutch nutrient companies that are saying, hey, give 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 EC. And then these plants are like literally barely surviving. And people are like, oh, run it until it gets like yellow tips, get the painted fingernails, to quote Rasta Jeff. I love him, but that's something he always says, push them. And they push them with nutrients, and they push it high and hard. And some people, and many, I've argued this, stress can lead to good results. A lot of people like to quote the grapes. Some of the best wine comes from the most stressed grape. So I think a lot of people think that it could be the same with cannabis.
The biggest yield doesn't come from the most stressed plant, though. Like,
I agree.
pretty much ever.
And a good healthy plant can yield high amounts of terpenes and cannabinoids. Like look at Brandon Rust plants. He yields giant ass plants. And my biggest best plant ever that I've personally grown was my most potent. So that to me, just
Absolutely,
like
the healthiest plants are the most potent. I mean, keep your plants healthy and happy. There's never been a stressed little runt that produces the best cannabis. I mean, seriously, growers, ask yourself that you've been doing this for a while. The best bud comes from your healthiest plants. And if you want to grow better bud, I mean, keep your plants healthy. And that means not pushing them too hard like that. I mean, if anybody wants to sort of argue the counterpoint, I'd love to go at that. But like,
I'll say this. I think what you said, Dr. Coco, specifically, exactly right. Like it's like I recently had a conversation with somebody who was it's my white whale, it's genetic testing, or it's my genetics are superior because my plants have been stress tested so much, never quantifying what even that means. They can resist all pests and diseases by my seeds. And as anyone who follows us knows, I get a kick out of that kind of claim, and I'm always unsatisfied when people are unable to sort of quantify what they mean. And that's the thing. How much stress and the kind of stress is very important. And I think that you can do very well. You don't have to make the plant miserable. You can grow it in certain ways, and then you can needle it, maybe very precise kind of priming with certain kinds of stressors.
And the kind of stress, this is like sending an athlete to the gym kind of stress. This isn't like,
exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah,
For a particular workout
by
regimen.
lifting weights kind of stress, not by a healthy individual that's like geared and primed ready to do that, not like making somebody suffer, right?
Exactly. Not like breaking their legs or like,
Right.
Yeah.
Not
Or
like
literally starving them
like
in
cracking
certain
them in the
cases.
kneecaps. Exactly.
Whether you're over or under feeding,
Yeah.
you're starving your plant. You're starving it of oxygen if you're overfeeding because the amount of nutrient makes it so saline they can't take up oxygen. I got a chopper right overhead, so I'm just gonna let Tao jump in.
Listen, there's a paper, I'll go hunt it down. It says definitely that it may not, with according to them, THC levels increase with botrytis infestation. And
I saw
there's
that. I
other
saw that.
stuff in there.
It was
Yeah, there's other
PM.
stuff in there. So there's some, was it PM? There's anecdotal
PM.
evidence that, certain stresses can push something somehow. I don't know. I didn't really look at those.
Well, that's the thing.
I read that
Usually
paper,
the stress has like a reason, right? And there's a response to a specific kind of trigger.
Right.
So
Right.
if you know what the effect of that trigger is, then it's a simple calculus, right? It's, I want this effect, so I'm going to prime these stressors at this level, however that's quantified. Not like, I'm just going to hit it with every single pest and every single other environmental issue. Yes, exactly.
I heard from Miss Nudie Grows, who works in the legal Canadian market, from their former master growers at places she used to work. They were being told and telling others in Canada to release thrips into their crop intentionally.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because of the stress response from the thrips would increase the cannabinoid percentage and the terpene percentage.
That's literally from that paper, right? Didn't we
what
go
I
over
was
that?
told by her. And then the other thing, Tao was just quoting the PM. I looked at that article, the max THC or whatever it was, and I think it might even been hemp. I'm pretty sure it was a hemp article, but
It
let's
was
just say
both, they looked at THC and CBD part. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
but I think it was like 16% was like the top one. And like it was being compared to like 11 or 12%. So they're like, oh, look at this big percentage.
Right.
When it got PM, it went from 11 to 15. And it's like, guess what? People are growing 25, 30, 35, 40
Yeah.
stuff now.
Work with a higher percentage strain, right? To see if that is actually
Right. Well,
Cultivate it
And
better.
is that even a generalizable fact? That's the other question, right?
It's
Right.
such a small sample size, guys. Everybody wants to like make these grandiose, sweeping sort of conclusions from very small sample sizes of some of these tests.
Exactly.
It's interesting insight, and we'll eventually learn more about this. But yeah, I don't think we know enough to say sort of how that works all the
At the
time.
same
Yeah,
time,
plant-
you gotta sit there and think, guys, isn't it fucking cool that we kind of know, we can kind of sit here collectively and say we kind of know more than what a lot of the fucking science really knows on this stuff.
Yeah.
It's funny to kind of, it's funny to be in a situation, because I haven't really experienced it before in my life, to be in a situation to where you're part of an industry where science is proving you right. Like stuff that you've already seen or already kind of confirmed in your own garden, science comes up and catches up later to just prove you right. I think it just gives me a giggle every time that happens.
Well, let me jump in and say quickly that we're really resin gland harvesters more than anything else. So that's the way I look at it. And if you have a healthy plant, you can have more plant material with more resin on it. So even if some chance a stressor will give you more THC, if there's half the amount of resin glands because the plant is damaged, then you're at a loss anyway. So plus, if they're putting in thrips, then they got to get rid of the thrips eventually, right? So
Yeah, exactly. It's very expensive.
I never heard of that, man. That's wild.
Imagine if instead of doing that, because the growth because the defense comes, I just posted on my Instagram, shameless plug about exactly this concept, the growth defense trade-off. We know that that's basically how, this is the conserved way that land plants deal with stress. And in reality, probably aquatic plants too, even algae, really. And it's like the defense comes at some cost to growth, by which I mean vegetative growth, body growth, essentially the differentiation of tissue, from like vascular to flowering tissue and all that important stuff. So that comes at a cost, and it comes at a labor cost and a price cost, and a product cost, and all that. So it's like, imagine if instead of doing all of that jazz, you just find what the priming effect of the thrips are, and then find a really cheap way to prime it, and then there's no damage, but they might create the defense response like, oh, I'm going to get some thrips now, but then
The
that never
research
happens.
is where the
really.
cost comes to find the primer. That's where it gets expensive.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
The-
to actually know in your mind
An
what the
example
actual
of like
effect is.
a study that did a good job, I think, and it wasn't perfect because if you look at the pictures of the plants, I mean, we could probably all grow a little bit better plants than them. But the University of Guelph in Canada, I think, is actually doing some decent research. One of the studies being the one that Doc made me aware of when I was advocating for drought stress latent flower. Unbeknownst to me, there was already a study out there. Doc linked me to, and I looked at it, and one drought stress event through the entire flower cycle, a single one, had marginal benefits. There was like an increase in THC, terpenes, and a small dry flower yield that was not even significant. It was a
In
small
that
amount.
one study at this point. But yeah, it's promising results, right?
But the thing that I liked about it was they also did 2 drought stresses and 3 drought stresses and
Right.
4 drought stresses and 5 and 6 and 7 once a week for the whole flower cycle. And guess what? Every other one of the circumstances ruined the crop. It made it so much worse. So it was like the results versus the control, which was like a properly watered condition all the way through harvest, which they set as their baseline, and then they repeated that after they made that like their SOP. Side by side versus the drought stress with clones, like everything controlled as properly as they could. They saw the one drought stress in like week 7 or week 8 for like, I think it was 7 or 10 days until 45-degree droop. So they had like very measurable, identifiable, and in my opinion, scientifically recreatable, unlike saying proprietary soil, or they said we used HP Pro Mix with GH3 part and we fed it in Coco for what, they told you exactly what it was. The EC, the measurement of the nodes and everything. Like if you get into that, paper is very well done agronomically and scientifically. So I have to take my hats off to them when it is done well. And I'm getting ready. I'm late flower to let my plants go a little dry until they start to droop, because it's something I found out about in lavender. I've done it in cannabis, and just one time is all you need. And you might even do it accidentally one time, but this was like my Velvet Punch F3, my second run of it. The first one was a stress test run, and I can see not only the growth speed, but also the yield, also the aroma, the color, everything in the plant versus the stress test run is so much better. In the run, I'm just crushing it. I'm giving everything perfect all the way up until the very last, 2 weeks when I'm going to dress stress one time. But it's noticeable, the difference in veg and everything. You're going to be a lot happier when you treat plants right. And the chopper's coming back. So hopefully I'm not being looked after.
I
Yeah, be
wanted to-
careful.
Coming
I
for you.
was stepping and kind of agreeing alongside what Matt kind of along the same lines is like, you got to be careful when you're doing drastic things like introducing thrips too, because you could be introducing all kinds of other things like viruses and
Good
God knows
point.
what else. But what made me think of that too was chat. And I want to highlight this comment because it was really hard for me not to laugh openly when I read it. And it was, who was it? Here was it? It was Slow Finger 2 in chat. And they said peppermint repels some pests. When I went to pick some, it was covered in white fly.
Yeah, because it's a concentration thing, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the thing.
I've seen the same with
Like,
marigold, because I was told if you plant marigold around the outside of your garden, it'll, repel some stuff out. And I went to look at the marigolds, like the pre-planted ones in the nursery, and they were covered in like spider mites. So it's just,
Yeah,
I think
oops.
they're attractors, aren't they? I thought they were like
for
like
some things,
a
that's the
signal.
thing. Pest is so broad. Like it could be
Right.
has some effect for some things and not others, and yeah. But like, and that's the thing with like even with like natural pesticides, like the bugs, various bugs can get resistance to them, right? It doesn't matter that there's some natural compound. What we're doing is we're hitting them at a concentration that they can't deal with. And when plants are having a response, the response is maybe not, because people think like repellents or something means that the plant, I understand that like that can sound like, oh, the pest will just not be on the plant. But that's not really what happens. What happens is that there's this really complex chain of events, which might even not even be relevant to the pest that's experiencing the defense response too. There's no guarantee. But assuming that it is, it's more like instead of having like the whole leaf get eaten, like half the leaf gets eaten, and then maybe the caterpillar or whatever moves to another leaf and it has its own behavior response. So like maybe it only eats the new growth because that defense isn't there, or maybe it only eats the old growth because the defense isn't there, or something like that. So there's all kinds of things happening, but usually when there's a genetic resistance that's really, really good against some sort of pest, it's because there's this concentration that's up over other cultivars or whatever that don't have it as much. And you have this like more marginal effect that in aggregate is way better for the yield because they can outgrow the damage.
I just saw some corn seed that was advertised. It
Yeah.
was like a non-GMO corn seed, but they had like data based on like this is like the hardiest one, most resistant to cold and this and that. It's like hybrid 85 or something. But it's interesting the interactions with pests and all the layers that you have to kind of go through. I remember Hoda Herb, a good friend of the show, he's been on this panel several times in the past. He mentioned, I think after seeing Brandon Rust and Matthew demonstrate how well a banker plant can work, like a explosive ember pepper to produce pollen that won't, pollinate your cannabis plant, but it feeds your predators. So Brandon implemented this successfully, and then Matthew and him kind of talked about it on this show and others, and I think other people were interested, Hoda himself included. So he went and got himself a explosive ember or some other pepper from a local nursery, and in doing something to try and prevent pests, he actually brought pests into his garden because that pepper plant was infested when he got it. So
that's what some people were sounding like, right? Going to the store and finding a plant that you were going to bring into your garden that's covered in the spider mite sounds like a point of ingress for new pests too. So be careful.
Right. And in that case, he already had predators on hand, so they were essentially going to get eaten up. But it is still a risk you take, and like Spartan said, it could be more than just the pest. I know another one likes to ride on like the legs. I think it's like Matthew probably could tell me, but
the whitefly and the broad mite is what you're thinking of, I think.
Yeah. So they literally like travel together, like it is riding the other pests through the situation. So, and the other thing is like ants can bring animal husbandry with aphids. I think they like pick up aphids and then use them to make the plant more susceptible because they like to eat the stuff that the aphids produce, like the whatever honeydew, I think.
Yeah. And like, it goes, there's turtles all the way down. So like the honeydew has some microbes from the gut of the aphid, and that when the ants eat it or whatever else will eat it, like wasps or something, then those microbes get into their gut. And there's been some interesting interactions there. But yeah, it's this crazy kind of cycle. And when you do use banker plants and things, it is important. Like you can't just turn off your brain. You have to like also crop scout those bankers too. And like Dr. Coco mentions, there's a logistical cost to that, right? And so maybe it's good for you in some places, and maybe in other places it's not, because maybe your banker plant of choice is like I was working with somebody in east of sort of more easterly, in Southern California. And they were looking for banker plants, but they wanted them to be native plants because they wanted to grow native plants in the area and they wanted this good synergy. But one of the other benefits was that over here in this coastal chaparral environment, a lot of plants are kind of woody, kind of scrubby, not really like, not lush, so that's great because they also tend to not get a whole lot of pests. Even the native ones, they tend not to be pested like the wood and that kind of stuff. And so when we chose those, it was for that exact reason. So you can get all these benefits of like attracting certain pollinators and some of which are predators at different life stages. But without as much of a downside as you might with like even my favorites, like the exploding ember pepper plants and things like that. So there's a trade-off, and you can do some research and really nail down something that might be a little bit more niche and more advantageous that way.
So I kind of want to jump back a little bit real quick to something Doc said earlier about the runt. And I agree with you, typically not being the most potent plant in the room. But I will say one of my plants was an exception, in not the most potent I've ever grown. It was Platinum Yeti F3. I think F3s and beyond start to get a little bit slower, especially early in veg, especially from seed. Some people have told me side by side growing my Velvet Punch F3 with their other stuff that's F1 or Fems, which are like S1s or first generation Fem crosses. In the early veg stage, they're like, your stuff is, and I'm glad my testers are being honest. They're like, it's slower. It's not growing as fast. And I think from what I understand about the filial generation of breeding, the further you go down that line, the less vigor you get. The F1 has that hybrid vigor if you're breeding with dissimilar parents. But I noticed it when I also grew two Scrog sent me some F4 Cinderella 99s, and they were just slower than everything else that I had popped from seed. So I thought that was an interesting thing.
I
That might have
don't
played
think
into
that
the
would
F3.
necessarily, sorry. I don't think it would necessarily get like less and less and less vigorous. You're certainly not going to have the same heterosis, that hybrid vigor that you can get when you cross two individuals that are really not related. That weeds out all of the potential sort of inbreeding depression. It weeds out all the deleterious recessive alleles. And the more you sort of cross back into the population, you can start sort of popping up those deleterious recessives more frequently, but to a certain extent, as you go through time, I mean, it's inbreeding. I mean, that's what you're essentially dealing with, the same sort of phenomena. It takes a few generations before you'd really start to accumulate significant impacts of that. And
Before you get the extra thumb and the clawed feet.
No comment.
With plants, I mean, they do this with corn all the time. They take stuff like F6, F7, and then like that company I was talking about earlier, they advertise hybrids. So they take those F6, F7s that are like runts you wouldn't want to grow down itself, but it's specifically, they probably use genetic testing to isolate, like this one has the highest sucrose production, or this one is the most, yield or whatever.
It's actually the parents, the P's in most corn breeding aren't sort of very vigorous plants, but they have known traits from sort of healthier offspring. But yeah, they're bred, they're selfed. Usually they're S7s, like you're talking about, and then they're crossed. So you take two different S7s and cross them to get that F1. And that F1,
that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a hell of a lot of work. But getting those two S7s crossed, that F1 is almost guaranteed to be heterozygotic for like everything. So it will have no deleterious recessive alleles just for that one generation, though. And that's what they do in cord seed breeding. They keep those parents and they keep crossing.
Because your F2s will suck.
Parents to grow.
Your F2s will not be, anywhere close to uniform, and their yield is going to be less. Typically, like if a corn breeder was to want to save their seed, which is actually illegal in most of the US because of unfortunate regulations that I won't get into, but
that's not true.
Okay, well, from what I understood,
there's some licensing agreements that farmers have signed with specific seed breeders not to do that, but it's not sort of against the law. It might be a violation of their contract. But
that's more
unless
likely
you sign that contract, it doesn't apply to you.
And most of these farmers can't necessarily afford the farms that they're on. They're in deep, loans. Not to generalize, so a lot of farmers do own their farms, but many of them are, have liens against them because they have expensive tractors and farm equipment that they're trying to pay off.
Yeah.
And so they get into these situations where they're kind of two hands tied behind their back, and then they have to sign this contract with the company, or worse yet, like their neighbor pollinates their stuff, and then they can't.
I don't think you need to make it sound so nefarious, Jack. I mean, people choose to sign those contracts, it's like you choosing to sign a lease agreement to get a car or something. I mean, you recognize that you're giving up some rights, but you're getting other benefits in terms of doing this, and you choose the right company that you want to sign that agreement with. You get your car that way. Farmers are making those decisions. the seed market is pretty twisted. I'm not making that argument, but they're not sort of getting bent over a barrel to sign the agreements in the first place. Farmers for years, I mean, for generations, have been planting hybrid corn in the United States. Farmers haven't been saving their corn seeds for generations. So this isn't a new thing either.
Yeah, even I was gonna say some of the like, because when we were doing the food garden over here, I'm like, yeah, I'll just take the seeds out of the food that we eat, the vegetables we get, and those don't work like that either. Some of them, anyway, I've been told.
Yeah, like I
So,
got
yeah,
blood
it's the
orange
same
seeds.
exact thing.
It might not
Yeah.
grow into a blood orange tree. Weird enough.
Yeah,
one of
that's
the-
very true.
That's the Achilles heel of hybrid breeding and the whole hybridization is that you can't see the seeds. If you open pollinate breeding, if you do basically what a lot of cannabis breeders do it that they don't really know that they're doing, when you're breeding stability by going to F7, right? And you're saying like, it's getting more stable as I'm going through this, and it's getting better, and I'm getting sort of less phenotypic variation because I've done careful selections to get down to F7. That's a style of breeding where growers can save those seeds, create their own seeds and have pretty much the same plants that they bought the seeds from. And most of the cannabis that we're growing, if you cross it with other cannabis plants, you're going to have a seed that's about the same quality as the original sort of hybrid mix was. But as the hybridization process gets better, the hybrid seeds become sort of more potent than the other seeds, and that the potency of those F1 seeds, man, farmers are willing to pay for those F1 seeds because they pop. They're more consistent, they're more vigorous, and they don't want to save their own seeds every year because the hybrid seeds sort of grow better than any kind of open pollinating varieties could.
Even in early cannabis, we saw this with like the early seed banks. It was like for a long time, people were trying to grow stuff from Mexican sativas in the US and they couldn't because they didn't finish fast enough. Well, then what came along? Afghani. Afghani was the big hybrid that was crossed into Thai, Mexican, Colombian, all these really long flowering, big, huge, tall, thin-leafed plants that people could never get to finish or were a hassle to grow indoors, were now cut in half or a third of the size, and the flowering time dropped several weeks off of it. And I think that we really saw those, and like even Kyle Breeder, who's not with us tonight, I think he's celebrating a birthday, so happy birthday, Kyle. But he has a couple strains that take really dissimilar land races and then cross them together, and you can see not necessarily that he bred it to the F7 or whatever, but he took stuff that was so uniform throughout its nature of, maybe it was passed down from 10 generations of people in a certain area, or maybe it was just left alone to open pollinate itself for decades in a certain area and people just collected that. But when you work with those types of things, it can be amazing. The similar type of heterosis, I think he even has a strain called heterosis because he saw, compared to all of his other stuff, this one was just like crazy from the jump, I guess, because they're so unrelated. And a lot of stuff that we have is kind of lower quality hybrids in the fact that they're not really unrelated, because it's like there's a cookie and there's an OG and there's a chem in like all of them. So they're all like somebody, I think it was Ethos Colin, calls them like kissing cousins or something. They're all sort of.
There's a little bit more inbreeding depression there, right? You could still self them out and at least get the pea plants to be more homozygotic. So you could, and this is what Tao I think said would be a lot of work, but self a cannabis plant like 6 or 7 times. Just keep back crossing it to itself. And what you're essentially doing is destroying the opportunity for heterozygosity, and everything's going to end up being homozygotic. It may not be a very healthy or happy plant, but it'll be a homozygotic plant. And the exciting part happens when you cross it with another homozygotic plant and create a plant that's perfectly heterozygotic. It's that heterozygosity that leads to heterosis, which is the hybrid vigor. We can still do that pretty much with cannabis, even if there is some, relations by doing that selfing process to it. But it's going to become a big mystery about getting it right, about having chosen the sort of right individuals to go through that selfing and crossing them with the right ones. Somebody makes a fire strain that way, though, they could take over the cannabis world.
I agree with that. And CSI Humboldt is one of the people trying it, as well as like Archive. He's like S1, S2, and he says there's like a lot of herms and then sterility when he gets to S3, like pistol-less cannabis and stuff that produces seeds, but the seeds are non-viable. It's like Stethonocarpy and Parthenocarpy or
Are
something.
they still non-viable when you cross them to another unrelated species though?
I don't think so, but
That's the moment. Some species you will never be able to, or some individuals you can't self them out sometimes because they'll end up with some homozygotic trait that's lethal.
That's a great point.
Basically, yeah, that definitely happens.
And somebody tried to do that for a
another one.
while. They were calling him Dr. Frankenbee, and it was like Sam the Skunk Man or whatever. He was going to try and do that so that people had to like buy seed every time or whatever, because he was going to try and make something that couldn't breed past F1 essentially.
Yeah, there's just that whole thing, man. From a breeder's perspective, it's possible to make seeds that are so good that people will choose to buy them every time. And that's absolutely what's happened over and over again in the history of horticulture and agriculture.
I think it's happening now in
Always
cannabis. The
conspiracy
best breeders.
about, like farmers being forced to buy seeds or I mean, farmers are choosing to because those are better plants and they're willing to spend the whatever it is to get the seed in the upfront because they're going to be a better, more consistent plant in the back end.
I agree with that. And I've seen it with like even the early stages of the cannabis market. Like I would say there's 40 breeders right now that are doing amazing work, consistent stuff. They've been around for roughly a decade or more, and they have strains that you can go look up their description, buy a pack of it, and it's going to smell, taste, and look like what you expect, which is kind of like when you go buy a tomato and it says, give it X amount of whatever, and you're going to get this type of tomato and it's going to taste and yield and look like a certain way. So CSI Humboldt is another person who I think I was just talking about him a second ago with the S1s, but he also has like IBL lines that he's described. He does open pollination. So he takes all the males and all the females from a line that he was given. I think in this case, it was like the Pine Tar Kush. I think it was given to him from Tom Hill. And so to preserve it, he just let it cross into itself generation after generation after generation for however many times he felt to stabilize it. And so I have a pack of those seeds, for example, but every time I try to grow them, they're way less vigorous in veg than everything else. And they're just not as happy. So what I think I should do is just grab one of those, either a male or a female, and then cross it to something like my Velvet Punch, and then see what the offspring
That's what
does.
everybody does.
That's speaking of cookies, I don't they're in some hot water right now. Like they just had in Thailand a shop opening with no product because at the last second, Burner tried to pull the rug on the grower and say, "Oh, the quality is not good enough, so we're only going to pay you X amount of dollars per pound." And the guy said,
Oh, man.
"You know where you can go." And so they literally opened up a shop with nothing. And another note, they just shut down their Oklahoma store. So cookies is definitely having. They're previously looked at as like this, elite multi-state operator, and a lot of people I think looked at them with a lot of high respect and regard because they've been doing well for a long time. But it shows that everybody is fallible. We can have our losses and failures, and they're just one of the other people that is now struggling in this current very difficult legal cannabis market across many states and countries.
Ain't that a fact?
On a happier note, because I hate to just shit on people, but I do, because they sold moldy ass weed I didn't even buy it, but my buddy bought some and gifted it to me from Cookies and got my wife very sick. Matthew and I actually smoked and we're fine, but it's still garbage. And I guess I hold a little bit of a grudge. It can happen to anybody, but I don't like Burner and Cookies for other reasons. But on a positive note, we were talking earlier about runts. I said that my Platinum Yeti F3 turned out to be a really good plant. Tao is like the king of keeping plants alive that he probably should have killed. So Tao, has any of those plants turned out to be something amazing? Have you had a runt that you're like, oh damn, thank God I kept this? It was the fire.
Well, no, but definitely a couple that were better than the rest, but they weren't good enough to keep. So, in that respect, I would say, yeah, I do have that the one is definitely a very lower yielder, but the weed is so good, so I keep it around. But it's not a runt; it's healthy and everything. I probably could tweak the growing to really pump up the yield on that one. And yeah, that's the other thing. If you have certain strains, you could adjust the structure of the plant to produce more for you, even if it's not a natural heavy duty producer. Because they make like skinny buds, so I could put them closer together and not worry about much. So
Top it more so it has more bud sites and
right, so it has
ends
more
up
branches
yielding a
where
little
they
bit
could be
more.
right next, yield a little more, and but like that's why I think breeding is a good if you have a plant that you really like that's a little low yielder, you could try crossing it into something that's bigger, or even if you just cross it into something that's different, it might have that heterosis. Yeah, that sounds about right. It might have that hybrid vigor, which could improve things. So
It's a tool. I mean, you can
Yeah.
see something like, oh, like Forum Cut Girl Scout cookies is a really low yielder, but a lot of people like the flavor and the potency. So then that cut got bred into a lot of
with
other
everything,
stuff.
yeah.
And
The other thing I was going to say is when we talk about runts, because someone said in chat, yeah, a lot of times the runt is like the most powerful or best tasting, but that's a runt because of like genetically, not because you're beating up the plant and not giving it its full potential, you know? So
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
it's
different things.
It's
Yeah.
not cultivator induced runtism. Yeah.
Right. It's not because
Yeah.
you starved it or underlit it or hit it in the corner or something like that, right?
what about you, Noah? Have you had any plants that were either genetically runty, or maybe it could be cultivator error? Like maybe we gave a little too much EC or too much water, and maybe got the roots weren't off to a good start, or like a bad transplant, but then that plant just came back with a vengeance. Has it happened to you in your experience at all?
Oh, of course. You know, it's every scenario you've been growing as long as I have, you're going to find. But I will say that you guys are right, that the healthiest plants are going to give you the best buds and the best everything. But I'll tell you what, actually, this last harvest, I had something weird. I had two of the exact same plant from the exact same clone, and I was putting it in my net, and it was late at night, I was tired, I'd been working, and I put it in and I snapped the main stalk on the plant. I was so pissed. And I was like, oh man, that plant's gonna suck. That plant, the exact same, they're both apple fritter lumpies cut. And that plant, the buds on it were way better. It dealed a little bit less, but I thought that was really weird. It was almost to that stress thing. I literally this just happened to me, and I was watching it the whole time. The leaves were greener, and it took a little while at first, like, and it grew that knot thing and everything, but it took off, and the weed is way better. I haven't had a chance to smoke it. I just harvested it yesterday, but man, it looks and smells way better. So it was kind of a weird experience. I'm just going through that right
When
now.
was it injured?
Day one of flip to 12-12. Like when I was taking it from my bedroom to my flower room, I snapped the main stalk on it. Like, and I taught my plants once, but it was the main one of the two. And it just, the whole thing was destroyed, literally like half the plant.
Did
I was
it
just in a
flowering
hurry, and I
and
just
juice at the same time that the rest of the crop did, or was it a
everything
little
was the
late?
same. Everything was the
Everything
same. Yeah, and I fed bull plants off the exact same gallon of nutrients. Everything was the same clone, same day, same mother, everything. So it was a really weird experience that
Yeah.
I just experienced this. So
I do actually think that physical abuse is a little bit easier for the plants to tolerate sometimes than chemical abuse, but
sure.
that's a pretty sensitive time. I'm not sure that I'd recommend doing that.
No.
Right.
I was
No,
Not
man,
an
if I had
SOP,
to-
but it's
Not
one of
do
those
it on
things
if
when it
I had-
happens.
But if someone said to you, you're gonna have to have a fucking damage to the main stock of your plant. What day of flower do you want it? I'm gonna say one. I'm gonna say day one because it gives me the longest time to recover.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably go like day 4 or 5, maybe. Let them get used to the 12-12 lighting schedule.
The
and
day
then
of harvest.
break them. Yeah, or the day of harvest.
That's a good
Jack
one.
wins.
There you
Yeah,
go,
that's
Jack.
the best answer right there, Jack.
That's the best answer.
Jack wins.
But yeah, ideally, I think I've talked about this in the past with super cropping, even when I got a really good knuckle at the right time.
Yeah.
It could be in my mind, but like sometimes it's so much frostier, just visually side by side. Like one is coated in a cloud of sugar, and then the other one is just fully tricked out. And then the one next to it looks good still, but it's just not quite as good.
Now, on the same plant, I've often thought that this may just be the plant prioritizing the injury, basically. So like a lot of growers will say, I super cropped one cola and it ended up being like a much bigger cola than this like other branch that I didn't super crop. And I'm like, yeah, you kind of forced the plant to send a bunch of energy to that branch because it had to deal with an injury, and it got sort of the focus of a lot more sort of the photosynthate.
It's interesting because it's like, just like with people, it has unforeseen consequences. Like when I had fractured my spine the first time, I thought I had a pulled muscle, and I was at the time playing basketball a lot, and the trainer was like, "Oh, you just have a pulled muscle. It's just a tight muscle, heat and ice. You'll be fine. You'll be fine." And it turned out I had a fractured spine, and the muscle was tightening to protect the spine. And the plant in this case is like using that energy instead of like a muscle tightening. It's sending whatever compartmentalization of decay in trees is like one way I've heard it described by an agriculturalist. I don't know if that applies to cannabis, but like there's trees where people will like put a shovel into it and you can come back and it grows completely around it, or like they cut holes out of it and people can drive a car through it. And plants have amazing ways to deal with it and get around that stuff. But I don't necessarily think, like, again, probably not an SOP type strategy, like I'm going to do this every time. But if and when it happens, it's not like we have to kill the plant right away because, oh, the world's over. But it feels like that when you snap your plant in half, especially on like you had a great veg, big, healthy, beautiful plant. You're just bending it up into that scrog, and like you've done hundreds of times, you're gonna go get your stuff ready to flip the flower, and then boom, like oh god, how's this gonna turn out?
Yeah,
People
it was a
actually
trip.
recover from those kinds of injuries, man, like remarkably well. It's pretty impressive, I think, because if we did that to like our necks, I think we always sort of liken it to our own spine. Like if I broke my main cord like that, I'd be like paraplegic for the rest of my life. But like, no, if the roots are happy and like the upper part of the plant is still happy and healthy and doing what it wants to do, and the roots are doing what they want to do, that plant's going to do whatever it can to kind of connect the two of those pieces together. And even if it's just kind of like hanging on by a thread, if you protect that thread for a few days, it'll sort of stocking itself up.
I just saw somebody who harvested a plant and they didn't even know.
Plants in the end. I mean, usually it does sort of come out in the final scale.
Someone I saw harvested their plant and they didn't even know that it had split until they like somewhere along the line, maybe the buds, like they did a main line and it got too wide and it split, and then they never pushed it back together or did anything to like protect it. But it just, the air around it scabbed right up, healed right up, and finished with basically like a giant V in the middle of the main stalk. And like Doc is saying, like the plant is amazingly resilient and having the ability to recover through that. We do have a couple questions, but I'm curious if Spartan Grown or Doc, if you yourself have had any good runts before we get to these good questions.
The best example I can think of, well, two is Mac 1. If you didn't know it, you'd think was a runt in veg, because the veg is for so slow, but it really shows out in flower. And then the most recent one for me would be Cobra Milk. Actually pheno hunted my pack of Cobra Milk because I had like 5 seeds. I pheno hunted that at work when I was still at Bitten Canico, and the one that they immediately wanted to get rid of was the shortest one, the shortest, stockiest one, what we consider the runt, because in a commercial setting, what we're growing tall, pretty tall plants, and they want to have the size to fill in the nuts.
Yeah.
But when I went through every plant and did stem rubs on it in early flower, and the smells I was getting, I was like, oh, 100%, I want that runt. And I took a cut of that and brought it home. And well, we'd already had cuts of each one, but I took a cut of that home that they were just going to throw all out. And I'm glad I did, because I really like it. And a lot of other people like it too.
I'm glad you kept it. It's inspired me to want to try that strain myself. I want to get a pack and do some pheno hunting. I love the milk crosses personally, but that seems to be a good one. And I'm glad that you found a pheno that you like.
Yeah, I gifted it to for Growly, and he's making Cobra Milk concentrate now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome. Shout out to Growly.
He does great work by all accounts. He has amazing flavor. How did it come through compared
Great.
to your own?
It came out, it was so funny, because the best way I can describe it is the experience I had with my son. I cracked open, I was telling him, I said, because obviously he smokes my flower, but I was like, hey, my buddy Fagroli made some concentrate out of Cobra Milk. He was, you brought in some Cobra Milk for him? I'm like, no, he actually grew it. I gave him a cut of the plant. He grew it himself, and he made the concentrate fresh frozen. I said, check this out. And I cracked open the jar and I had him smell it, and his eyes get all big. He goes, that smells just like Cobra Milk. And I'm thinking, well, duh, what do you think?
Sometimes it doesn't turn out like that, though. It's cool
Yeah.
that you guys must have done something similar enough, or that strain, just the genetic expression is strong. Like Gorilla Glue Floor, I've seen it in hydro, organic, and everything in between, and it always comes out pretty gluey and fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doc, have you had any runts at all that turned out? Because it seems like you are also an advocate of not wanting to keep those kind of smaller or unhealthier or just slower growing plants.
I mean, I've definitely had runs, like plants that just didn't sort of perform as well as I wanted them to, or sometimes it's been operator error, grower error, or not sort of being on top of things as much as I should be, or doing something weird like growing them in a party cup or something like that, right? Like we do every once in a while. But and every once in a while, like the last harvest I had, like I didn't do a great job with the grow. I'd gotten like so sort of behind schedule with everything in the grow. I never got automatic watering set up. I went out of town and let them dry bag. There's a good example, for like 4 days without watering. Just did some ill-advised things, and the plants were not as sort of vigorous. That's the kind of sort of abuse that I'm thinking of more in terms of like runs don't produce, and they didn't. I mean, it's decent, but I know they would have been better if I had, both in sort of quality and quantity, if I had done a little bit better with them. And it wasn't sort of a dumpster fire, but like it could have been better. And in other situations, yeah, where you have one plant that's sort of like, for whatever reason, either something happened to it during training or transplanting, or it just was genetically different or whatever. If it's growing slower than the other ones and sort of not keeping up, generally they get pushed in my tent. Like there's a competition for space, so the plants that do grow well will sort of like push into the territory of the plant that's not growing well. And yeah, those plants that don't sort of defend their territory, none of them sort of like harken back is like the top flower producers, what I mean, the top quality producers. And fortunately, I think that going through, when I grow like 4 plants or 6 plants, it's almost always the plant that yields the most is the plant that I like the most. It's the one I end up with the most of, which is sort of nice the way that works out, because
It's a good problem to have, so to speak.
yeah, it would be bad if it was like the one you only got the least of was like always the one that you like the most. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
I think those are all good points, and I think it sort of highlights between like a genetic runt and like when we just know we're not doing our best as a gardener, and like we could get it to a higher potential if maybe we weren't on vacation or we didn't have these things. Like
Right.
if you had automated watering set up from the start, like you're traditionally used to.
Right.
I think for those who don't know, like you went through a move before this grow, and so it was getting things set up. It can be difficult the first time around, and like anybody, you're still kind of getting adjusted, and so it's not going to be 100% perfect the first time you do it, and that's part of the learning process. And I think that's what makes it fun, because even as like somebody who, I think many people on this panel, whether or not they call themselves this, would qualify as an expert, whether it was like they had to give testimony or how people look at us because we produce content about this particular topic for 200 plus episodes or whatever. But it's just interesting because every single grow presents its own unique challenges. Like a piece of equipment might break, or you'll have a really weird weather phenomenon where maybe it's raining a bunch in your area where it doesn't typically rain a bunch, and now you're like, how am I going to deal with all this extra RH? And or just extremely cold temperatures in a time of year where it's not typically cold and things like that. So there's a lot to overcome, and I'm glad that, as good
Yeah.
as all of us might be, we can all admit that we have our struggles, and not every grow is our very best grow. So it's this plant humbles us and teaches us all the time.
It takes a lot of effort, to be honest with you. I mean, sort of, I know when I've had really good grows, right? I think I know what to do to have a really good grow, but sometimes I don't have the time or the effort or the patience or whatever it is at that particular moment. And I always admire growers that sort of always consistently turn out great home grows, people that are running multiple tents, and people that are, as their sort of home grow hobby, because it's a dedication. I mean, keeping all that stuff going, different in a commercial sense when it's like your job, and some of these home growers may be doing it somewhat as a job too, but there's work. And I also try to cut myself some slack when I'm busy and I can't do everything perfectly in the garden. I'm like, the plants are going to survive too.
Yeah, it's amazing how even on our not best grows, we can get a good amount of really dank flower despite not doing everything so perfect. So it's a happy medium of trying our best. Noah the grower always inspires me. I have a clip on my Instagram of he's like, the best growers are the hardest workers. When it's time to clone, you clone. When it's time to transplant, you transplant. And every time I hear that in my head and I like stay to it, I'm just like crushing it. And when I get lazy and I don't abide by that, the plants definitely slow down and don't yield as much. And might become vulnerable to either nutrient deficiencies or maybe too little water or too much water and things like that. Just trying
Just
to
lack of
get to it when you can.
consistency. Yeah, exactly. Just the lack of consistency when things start. You got to stay on top of everything to really like growing, following my style at least. You want to kind of stay on top of everything and make sure things aren't getting out of whack. And like just thinking back, I remember several times when it was like time to go to bed. I'd be, oh shit, I haven't mixed nudes and I need to water the plants, and I'm going to do it in the morning. It's like that's not a good decision to make.
We never wake up and say, "Oh, thank goodness that I pushed it off till the next morning." That's
Right.
for sure. But it happens, and sometimes you literally just don't have the energy. Like there's some nights where I came home and I was so physically exhausted from work, I just laid down and passed out. Like could not tend to any garden. So I completely understand the balance of that. And
Yeah.
Matthew, I'm curious. I know whether in your own personal garden or in a commercial setup, I'm curious if you've had any experiences with runts, be it cannabis or other plants, stuff that maybe started off slow or maybe for one reason or another your garden wasn't going perfectly, but it overcame it, and maybe just a notable memory of that type.
Yeah, definitely. I know that I've had experiences like this before. Certainly like in a commercial setting, like in propagation, for example, it'll happen. I remember doing a trial with a hemp grower, and they had some sort of an issue. They were trying to figure out if it was like their media or something was happening, and it ended up being, or I mean, we didn't know conclusively, but we were pretty sure that the main problem was that um, they they just the problem they had was that they were in a greenhouse setup that was like built in the 70s, and so it wasn't really, there was a lot of like idiosyncrasies about like airflow and like sunlight getting in there at the right time and everything like that. And what they found out was that they were just overwatering, which is so easy to do because the hemp seedlings, well, not seedlings, but plugs, basically, they were, I mean, they were just getting too much water, and some of them were just rotting. Like, like the roots were just like getting too much water. They were dying. They're succumbing to all kinds of problems through that process. But it's so hard because this is in Southern California where the sun, beats down very heavily. So they really had trouble. This isn't really, again, this is like not a genetics thing. This was just an operator problem, right? An ID10T problem. And so the issue is that they're so small and the substrate was so miniature, and they had them in trays. So the sun came out and they would dry them out really quickly. So they had to find a way to like moisten them enough that they could get enough moisture that the plants would survive, but not too much that they would die. And it was just so difficult for them to do. And yeah, so that's my story about a stunt. So these plants were stunted, right? That's how I fits with the story, I guess. And eventually those plants were pretty nice. Very vigorous growth. I love I know it's not the part of the growth that a lot of people like to really worry about, but honestly, one of the things I love about cannabis is how like woody and vigorous it gets. It grows so fast, and some of these, and this is hemp, right? So some of these plants were just so, like, I don't know what to say. They have this like aesthetic to them, kind of like lumber almost. And yeah, so like they just shot up. Like once we were able to get a little bit better of a watering regimen down, it was a success story after that. But it was really hard going, and this were like hundreds of plants, and a lot of them just had to be thrown away. And there were some other pest issues and things like that, but yeah, it's hard. It's hard out there when you're trying to do these things en masse. And again, a lot of times, like people will often say, well, if you have the perfect conditions or you make these really great context, then it's fine. And that's true, admittedly, in a lot of cases. But a lot of times people are not inheriting a perfect scenario, either because you're being hired and you're in this ecosystem, this historical system that existed before you, and like I said, you know, they were growing in an old greenhouse. There were tears and rips, and it wasn't very well isolated from the environment. And some of the workers were not really the most experienced. And, you know, there's just a cavalcade of problems. But that's the real scenario that a lot of people cultivate under, especially in a commercial setting. And it's not just like one or two of your buddies. And even if it were, that comes with its own limitations as well. Not only you know, in capacity, but also like in your ability to maybe collaborate. Which maybe gives you some insight into my own personal opinions about. I love working with friends, but my personal friends, you know, it's hard sometimes for people to make professional decisions. I guess I'll leave it at that.
That's a good point. I think the hemp note was also interesting. Cannabis can also be, it's incredible how light, but also strong it can be. Like I grew up playing baseball, and like a wooden baseball bat is fairly heavy, and like equivalent sized bat of like a hemp stalk would be extremely light, but it's still extremely hard. It's almost like a bamboo or something, you know, where it's just like the woodiness of it and aggressive growth is impressive when you're around it, especially like when you're there a few days a week, or if you go there and then you go back a week later and you see like, wow, they're a foot taller and they're just way more branches and everything. It's wild how when it's healthy, it can really grow extremely fast and strong.
Yeah, I know. It's like bamboo. I know a lot of people have said this as well, but like it definitely just feels like it's palpable and you can see it almost daily. And you know, I love those ruderal type species of plants where they just like eke out an existence in the asphalt, or like, you know, you go on a hike. Like I've been hiking in places around San Diego, like Mission Trails, for example. And because of all the rains, it's so much more verdant and green. It's exceptional. And when the sun goes down and you're in the valley, it gets cool, and it's like it just got this refreshing feeling that is hard to get usually in this neck of the California desert.
It's weird.
So-
Our ecosystem has definitely changed with this heavy bit of rain we've been getting these past few months. Everything is so lush and green, and like you're just saying, that it even makes so we're having like higher humidity or moisture, and like in the evening times we're getting like dew and things that like you wouldn't typically have as much of, or any, like in certain times where it's like your feet get soaking wet just walking through a patch of grass, where typically here it's like bone dry or dying a lot of the season. So hopefully it doesn't all dry out
That
and
nasty
become fires.
drought for years. I mean, this is definitely a wetter winter, but I mean, I think we're comparing it to a pretty dry stretch of years, right?
Yeah, oh for sure. I'm happy that we're getting it.
Yeah, no,
Thankful. We
Things
need
are
it for sure.
green. It's like, wow, outdoors is a lot greener than it used to be around here.
My only worry is that it doesn't sustain typically. So we get it for like a little bit, and then when it gets lush and green, then it all dies off, and then our fires are
Oh, by
even worse.
June, yeah.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's for sure. And you know, like the fire ecology could not suck so much, and we could have some prescribed burns or something. Because when we let it all build up, the oils and everything, it gets too hot, and even the fire adapted plants will die. Some of these plants out here, you know, infamously, I think the Torrey pines are such a plant where they require some fire exposure, some sort of heat exposure, in order to actually germinate.
Or just like we used to have a $54 million budget in California for clearing the dead forest, and it got cut to $2 million when Governor Jerry Brown was in office. So $52 million less, and we've had the worst wildfires ever since then. So I think a combination of like doing controlled burns and also paying people to go out there and clean up all these
Drought
dead
has
trees.
really
And
been hard on.
Oh yeah, it's not a one solution problem for sure. I agree with that. It probably wasn't even enough money in the first place.
right.
But
Well,
that's
and that
just
being said,
speculation.
I don't want to get so California and non-cannabis specific, because we have a pretty international audience, and we have a great question from VPD Grows some boof. Says, at Cheap Home Grow, when and where would a product like Hygrozyme be used? Is that like HydroGuard? And this was earlier in like the kind of roots questions or roots product conversation earlier. Anybody have any thoughts on Hygrozyme? Has anybody, or Hydrozyme, I should say, has anyone used that? Any thoughts about it?
Well,
I'm forgetting what it's composed of.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly the constituents, but the
Is that
name kind of gives it
beneficial
away that
enzymes
it's
for-
an enzyme. So it's
Yeah,
gonna be
It's like a SLF 100 almost, or
Yes.
one of those other general enzyme products that people will typically use in like cloners, maybe a little X amount of milliliters per gallon to promote like a healthier root zone is how I typically see them marketed. HydroGuard is the other product that they're comparing it to. So maybe it's a silicone or silicon product of some sort.
Guard, I think, is a
Hydrogard is
beneficial bacteria.
Oh, okay. Maybe I was thinking of like Rhino, hydro.
A lot of these products are like very similar in
Yeah,
phrasing.
yeah, so the
Biohydro,
alive,
yeah.
alive bacteria that you're adding, and then hydrozyme is more an enzyme. So think of breaking things down, kind of. Enzymes are usually used to break things down.
Yo, how do any plants grow out in the wilderness without nobody coming around with bottles for them?
A lot of them don't.
Ah, good point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, less facetiously, I mean, many of them are growing like the rainforest, right? There's plenty of stuff that there's competition and a lot of natural resources that are already there. But when it gets cleared out and you're starting with a barren land, for example, you've got to give it something. Plants can't grow with nothing. Like
Yeah,
they can grow in pretty
that's
poor soils,
true.
but they grow a lot better in rich soils. And the
There's
point of horticulture and
ecology
agriculture.
in the poor soil. It's not really very poor, but I mean, if there's enough ecology there in like a rainforest situation, it's that ecology that's helping to provide all that sort of is needed. It's not just sitting in a state ready to be used by the plants.
So like
Yeah.
have they figured out any more about like the whole Terra Preta thing? Was that people in the Amazon actually like putting like biochar into the soil, or was it a natural consequence of forest burns and like they have that rich, really dark black soil? I think it's called Terra Preta or Terra Preta.
Yeah, Terra Preta or Terra Preta, yeah. I
But-
don't know anything extra from what I've read before, so maybe there's some new information I'm not aware of. My understanding is that that is the idea, is that like there's been a concerted human influence.
Yeah.
But you know, some people go ahead and say that like it's all like I don't know if you could really say that the entirety of the Amazon rainforest is human like completely human facilitated. I think that predates us, right? So
That would be a
yeah,
question
but
for
like
Doc, because that's more of like a anthropological question.
Yeah, I mean, we have an impact on it. So at what point does the impact that we have on the environment become like, terraforming?
I don't know. When you
Yeah.
look at some of these growers' houses, man, their kitchen, their master bedroom, the living room, all have marijuana plants growing in them.
I love to see that.
That's they terraformed the whole house into a jungle.
You could have a
People have
You have a
houses
little
inside of
Hobbit
a
hill.
greenhouse. I love that, like the setup. It lessens like the heating costs. Like I think it was in like Iceland or somewhere. Somebody built a big glass greenhouse around their actual home, and they grow a bunch of food and
Yes, I
stuff that
saw
wouldn't
that.
naturally happen. So I mean, we're pretty agriculture and horticulture are both literally like breaking away from nature and like
Yeah.
doing the best we can to make them perform better in certain settings.
Right. Yeah. And even gathering, type activities or clearing different species out, like hunting, all sorts of things that we do is going to have an impact. Like a beaver isn't trying to create a lake necessarily. They're just trying to create a safe entrance to their den. And they end up like, flooding an entire valley. Like, does it have to be your goal to do that in order for that to be sort of the consequence? But yeah, no, I think that the rainforest in the Amazon, if that's what the question is, would look very different if humans had never existed in that area. I mean, unrecognizably different, but at the same time, it's at least the wild parts of it are still like not totally dependent on human cultivation or humans engaging in their reproduction or a necessary part of the reproduction, which is sort of a necessary part of the definition of any horticulture or agricultural system, is that humans are necessary to the reproduction of that system year over year or through time.
That's a great point. I think it's
I mean,
go ahead.
What I was gonna say, like, there's this concept, and people want to say this is unnatural or whatever, but I think that belies a great misunderstanding because
Yeah, I have a hat.
it's called It's
Yeah,
It's called
just
niche
part of
construct.
nature on the front of my hat, because it's like people would say that. I'm like, we're part of nature too. We have to sort
Yeah,
of wrestle
it's-
with those consequences, but humans are part of nature.
Well, and whether the fire
Beavers,
is caused by
ants.
humans or nature, like a lightning strike, or it's because a cigarette was flicked into the forest, it causes a
Right.
forest fire. And then there's no agriculture many times or
We have more
horticulture.
control over some
Stuff
of
just
those
grows
things.
back though after a fire. Volcanoes, stuff grows great in volcanic soil. Like something about fire
Some stuff,
and
yeah.
death brings new life though without
Well,
human
to
interaction.
play devil's advocate, we're doing things that aren't naturally innate to our you know, we're not born wanting to plant seeds and kill other plants, right?
Like instinctually, no, it's definitely
Yeah.
No,
also
no.
learned.
I wanna argue
That's
that.
true.
I
We're
wanna
really
argue that
not
I was
living on
born
a
wanting to plant
natural,
seeds.
yeah. If we were
It's called
nature-
niche.
yeah.
In ecology,
Sorry,
we
but
call
that's
it
what you're
niche
saying, that it has to
construction.
be in your instincts in order for it to be quote unquote natural. Then like
That's true.
there's a whole lot
Yeah.
of behavior that's not natural, and I don't know that that's a really workable definition.
The thing is that yeah, it's niche construction. Like animals have been doing it for a long time. Like I can't remember the exact phrase,
Bird
but
nest.
basically there was this big revolution in like the evolution of animals, where once animals started digging, that changed the whole paradigm. That changed everything. Once you had like multicellular organisms out in the marine layer, that would like dig, because there would be microbial mats, and basically they'd go in and they'd disrupt all of that. And there's been a bunch of times in nature where like we didn't start off having oxygen in the atmosphere. So
Right.
like
I mean-
how separate are we from that development?
I think there's still
Right,
certain
now we
people that
rely
are
on
pretty
it.
close to
That's with
nature.
a bunch of pollution. Yeah, but
Yeah.
and created all that oxygen that allowed sort of us to exist here. But at the same time, I think that those ways of thinking make it seem like any reckless decision that we make is perfectly fine, because like other things have been more reckless. I'm not as reckless as that volcano or whatever, but I think that we probably should make more responsible decisions than that, in terms of like we really can impact these things. So we really can make decisions that have lasting impacts on the ecosystems and the climate that we interact with. So
Yeah, I'm definitely not advocating for
there's been big
microplastics in
changes.
your bloodstream, right? So
What's that?
I said I'm definitely not advocating for, say, microplastics in your bloodstream, for example.
Well, I mean, that's the world we're living in, though.
Even though that's
Yes, it
naturally
is.
occurring event, yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Right.
you were kind of talking about, right, Tal?
Yeah.
Right, just because it's natural. See, this is the problem. People draw this distinction.
Right.
There's natural and then there's artificial, and natural is good and artificial is bad. And frankly, I always hesitate sometimes because I realize I'm about to say fighting words, but that is the polarity that animates a lot of organic gardening. I think is that there's sort of a natural versus an artificial, and the natural is good and the artificial is bad. And I just think it's more complicated than that.
A little bit. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
not
like
a
to
thin
remind
line. It's a
people.
very fat line. It's very hazy at both sides of that line.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's not really the useful distinction in a lot of situations. And it's a really arbitrary distinction in a lot of situations, right? So to get back to sort of like, why is it better, or what does better mean, right?
Right.
It's a very
And then
human
go from
concept.
there.
Yeah, better for what and in what case, right?
Like, what does better mean, and then how do we achieve better, as opposed to just doing a categorical style thinking where you're like, natural is better, this is natural, therefore this is better. That's just sort of categorical thinking. It's simple shortcuts through sort of analysis. Actual analysis requires sort of like breaking it down and interrogating it, not just categorizing it.
I'll say that Spartan said earlier he felt like he was born wanting to plant a seed. I feel like one of the reasons I use cannabis is like I've heard there's something called like a warrior gene. Maybe there was like violence and aggression in my family for generations and generations. But I feel like I have like underlying, sometimes anger and heat that like I'm quicker maybe to temper than some people, and cannabis helps me not feel that way. And that's one of the reasons that I really enjoy it. So I think whether it's like maybe Spartan's family, we're all growing plants. And many people I know come from families that, yeah, it's taught, but like even if he was separated for some reason, or not even Spartan in this example, but if anybody was like from a family of farmer after farmer after farmer, and then they get pushed off to the city or something like that and adopted into some non-farming family, I think sometimes there's like something within. I don't know if like that actually it might be hippy dippy or whatever, but I think certain stuff, maybe it's like within your genetics, like maybe they were a certain maybe shorter people are more well adapted to doing certain types of activities. So they got into those activities because they were short and they like fit into these places and their hands were smaller and they worked better with fine things and something like that. But that could be a bad example because I'm a Spartan gardener, but it's I think that their level, maybe even a very, very small level of like innate stuff. But I think most of it is just taught, and especially horticulture and agriculture. And we continue to learn. That's why we love shows like these, is the education. We continue to get better, hopefully each week.
Yeah. We have maybe a natural tendency to want to learn certain things or to be fascinated by certain things. And I certainly think that children display a fascination with plants. So if you have children in your life, grow plants with them. Children love plants and growing plants and all of that. So to the same extent that like children love language, we're not born with language, but like language is a fundamental part of what it is to be a human being, and being able to speak and communicate and use language is almost definitional to what it is to be a human being. We're not born with it, but we're born with an interest in it. We're born with a desire to learn it, and sort of like a fascination when it's in front of us. And to be honest with you, I think we're born with as much fascination and interest in plants as we are probably with language. So to that point, we're like born to be farmers.
Just to follow up with that, I'm always like a proponent of the victory garden, and I'm not growing enough of my own food, but I always hear the stat like only 1% of Americans and probably 1% of the world at this point is growing their own food. And
Not
it's something we
1%
can
of the world.
do pretty
No,
harm-free.
a lot of people in other countries are actually peasant farmers. So a much larger percentage of, the quote unquote third world or the global south is engaged in agricultural production. It's still changing. I mean, urbanization is certainly sweeping, but it's still a much larger percentage than in the United States.
But even here, like I think we think sometimes that we're like so modern and evolved, and like sometimes we get away from the ways that the old ways that can be actually very, very beneficial, because people want to talk about like the harm of where their food comes from, and people will like be like, oh, anti-meat, and then the meat people will be like, well, actually when you do commercial agriculture, there's stuff where you're killing animals, whether it's bugs or rodents or birds or whatever else, and it's like one of the least harm input ways of getting food for yourself and your family is to grow it yourself. Have a community garden, do something where you can make your own compost. You're controlling the inputs, you're controlling the pesticides and other things like that. And I think in the US it is actually, I think 1%, and most of the gardeners and farmers are like over 50 years old. So like Doc said, I just want to really advocate, if you do have kids or no kids, teaching them how to grow their own food and just plants in general is an amazing thing to do, because not enough people are doing it in the US and in modern times. And I think it's even in other countries becoming, as the world becomes more globalized, certain areas produce a bunch of things like wheat and corn, and then it gets exported out. Like even places that formerly didn't get any of this stuff really imported in there are now getting it and becoming more part of the global supply chain. So it's something I think that's worth holding on to and continuing to advocate that people learn about, not just for cannabis. As much as cannabis is a great thing to grow, I think that learning other foods as well is very important for all of us.
Yeah, I definitely feel, and like that's always been sort of an interesting interaction. Like for me, like at this point, I've probably worked with cannabis more than any other crop by far. Not probably, but by far is this the case. And yet, I get a great sense of fulfillment with growing other kinds of plants too, for textiles, for food, and that sort of a thing. But there can be competition between that, right? Like which crops are going to be, important for certain things. And there's of course a human element, a business element that comes into it. And yeah, without getting like political or into the weeds of socio-political excitement, it's like I talked about in a recent presentation, there's hop powdery mildew, and cannabis is very closely related, and hop powdery mildew can get onto cannabis and hop. Well, when it got into hop, it killed all the hop. Like in 1997 or something, and just destroyed. I think we talked about it earlier. Massive amounts of damage. So my question is for the cannabis growers, what are we going to do? And I know this is going to sound very contentious, but what do they do for controlling hop? Because hop powdery mildew, because in the past they had a quarantine and they were very controlled about what they allowed in, because also there's a population on the East Coast, and if that mating type populates in the West Coast and they come together, they're going to transfer a bunch of resistance genes that makes them incredibly hard to deal with on the East Coast. So there's this, so we know there's this ticking time bomb that's going to happen. And it's like all these people are trying to grow in like Oregon and Northern California. It's like there's this conflict. And like, I don't want to say that people shouldn't be able to grow cannabis or anything, but at the other time, like some people think, oh, we should just grow it everywhere. Just like, just grow it everywhere. Don't
Overgrow
who
the
cares?
world.
Just put it all over the world. And it's like, you know, like
Planted
that
at the
could,
police station, planted at the neighborhood, wherever,
that-
you know, people are
there
doing
could
that
be
stuff in
some
every business.
downsides to this. Yeah. I don't know. Like, does that resonate? You know, I feel like there
Well, even
could
with
be a
just
better
males,
way.
like if you just, there's regular seed out there,
Sure.
right? So like if I just gave it out irresponsibly to people that don't know what they're doing and they grew it outdoor, that's going to pollinate potentially valuable to them medicine, something that might, if it gets pollinated, be not the quality that they were expecting, with all the inputs and time and effort that they put into it. Although I do think that pollinated bud can still be very good quality. It's not what most people are looking for, and it's a lot more effort to break down, especially if you're a flower smoker, not like a concentrate user. So, and on top of that, what you were just warning of is like, we saw with hops that in the 90s, I'm sure beer prices and stuff went up then. I was not old enough and didn't drink alcohol at the time, so didn't really hit home with me. But anybody, all the beer drinkers out there were probably like, why the hell is beer so expensive? Because that's one of the primary things I'm sure made with hops, and
Yeah,
something
yeah,
similar
absolutely.
can happen with cannabis, although prices right now are on a pretty hard downward trend. And Doc has been saying this for literally for years on the show. Like, it's
Yeah.
the price of cannabis with legalization. Legalization is what's keeping the prices up, and now that it's becoming more and more legalized, it's going to get closer and closer to the cost of agricultural products, and the cost per pound of those is not in the thousands. It's like, what people are paying for like heads lettuce and things like that. It's like, that's where cannabis is going, and we're seeing that happen in the legal markets.
Farmers don't
Yeah,
make
right.
big profit margins in like any crop except
No.
for drugs. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's it.
It's true. It's true. It's a cash crop. It's a luxury crop, as they say. I'm not saying, and I'm trying to sorry
But
about
even-
the mic swipe.
No,
I'm
you're
not
fine.
trying to downplay the importance of cannabis by any stretch of the imagination, but like, it's really like people have to collaborate, right? People have to grow, and even if you're growing by yourself, you can be influenced by people outside your property, and so there has to be an understanding, whatever we want to call it, social contract or whatever. Like the hop growers are not going to appreciate the cannabis growers being this inlet for this really destructive pest.
Right.
And so I just feel like something should be appreciated about this.
Those
That
externalities, though, and that's exactly what they are. They're basically just externalities that nobody's paying for, that nobody
Exactly.
has paid for. The one that I've always thought was interesting was like the honeybee farmers. It never pay people for the nectar that their honeybees eat.
Oh yeah.
In fact, it often works the other way when they're brought into plants or to orchards or whatever to do pollination. But like any beekeeper depends on their bees going out and finding flowers that like you or your neighbors or some other farm or whatever is growing, like all of those things. And then the farm stops growing those flowers and your bees don't have food anymore. Like, can you sue that farm? Like, hey, my bees have historically eaten your flowers and now your flowers don't exist anymore and my bees are starving to death. It's almost a situation like that, right? Where like getting imposed a new negative externality is basically the same as having a positive externality removed from you. Anyways,
On
It's tough
the global
because
scale, that's the Amazon rainforest, right? It's a big carbon sink. It does a bunch of stuff that affects the entire globe. But as you get smaller and smaller, it's not doing that so much.
the problem is
So-
it becomes, are we gonna
it produces
make the
this
government
big-
regulate it, or are we gonna have the people privately as an industry individually come
Right.
through with a reasonable way to manage it? And I think in the most part, unless like environmental regulations or ag agencies step in which some cases they do, like California really has a strict ag import checkpoint, everything. Like, we're a multi-billion-dollar the 5th largest economy in the world, mainly based on ag and tech. So we have a lot of regulation and things like that, but some
Yeah.
people would argue maybe that's not the best thing, but I know it's about 545 here, and that's about one Spartan grown. Typically gives his final thoughts and shout outs. So I want to pass the mic over to him to let him do that now.
Thanks, Jack. I wanted to just jump in and answer Matthew's question about what are we gonna do. Even I can tell you what's gonna happen in the cannabis community, Matthew. It's gonna get passed around on clones all throughout the cannabis community until it finally makes its way to a fucking commercial setting. And when it wipes out a commercial grow, people are gonna start paying attention. And they're gonna play catch up just like they are with the HPLVD and everything else. So that's how that's gonna go. That's the way I see
You're
that going.
probably right.
That's the blueprint. We've seen it.
Right.
We've seen it.
We've
with
seen
hot
it
wheat.
Yeah.
with cannabis and many other crops. No, I think that you're clairvoyant, Spartan. I think you're right.
It's the new beads. The new beads give it to him. I see the future now.
+2 to wisdom.
Thank you. But I just want to shout out the testers that are all out there. You all know who you are. I've set out 50. I've got 50 different testers right now, and I've turned plenty of people down now because it's just too many to keep track of. But I'm really doing a wide test and hopefully get a lot of feedback. And I've been getting some good feedback back. Germination rates have all been good right now. Most people are still in veg. I've had a couple people report that they've just recently flipped to flower. Some people are on Coco for Cannabis with their journals. So check out Coco for Cannabis, or if you're already a member, you can search some of the strains on there. I think Lone Star Larf, off the top of my head, he's got one going on there. Anyways, it's cool to watch these things grow. It's like watching, I don't know, your creation grow in different gardens, and it's cool to see. So shout out to all those testers that are getting back with me. It's cool to hear from you. And shout out chat for watching the show. Love you guys. I'm going to shoot out to the Michigan Bros Grow Show. I'll be over there in like less than 15 minutes. So we'll see you over there.
Before you go, Spartan, somebody asked, and we didn't answer this on the show, but they said, what is the most valuable seeds in your collection? And I think they were talking probably like money wise, but I was going to answer the seeds that I've gotten from my friends like Spartan Grown and Russ Brandon, because they're pretty irreplaceable at this point. And I know the quality that was put into them. So I appreciate that. And I can't wait to see them in flower. So thank you again for those.
Appreciate that. No problem. Yeah. Yeah, the most valuable seeds are the ones that haven't been popped yet, man, because they're not really worth anything till you pop them. And so I got a lot of, well, I guess that's not true. Some people like to make money out of them. That's just not my mindset. Some people like to hold on to them and then resell them. Anything that I buy, I have an intention of not selling. I have intention of dropping them into water or whatever and popping those things.
Grow them out, people.
Anyways, that's just me. Much love, guys. Keep growing. We'll see you next week.
Love, Spartan.
Thank you, Spartan. Always good.
Later, man.
Some people treat them like baseball cards and like collect them and trade them, and some I think just hoard them just to have them because they like to have them. And nothing wrong with that, but I do personally buy them to grow them.
As several growers have told me, buying seeds and growing seeds are two totally separate hobbies.
I definitely can relate.
Yeah, I mean,
scrolling seed bank is like, it's a dangerous thing to do because you're inevitably going to see one that sounds good, and then you're going to want to buy them. So
yeah, you're gonna be like, oh, that's gonna be interesting. I'll get some of those too. And then
you're like, will something catch my eye? Something will catch you eye. Try. It
for seed
will
buyers,
look good.
Yeah.
Anonymous, we could I'll give one tip. Do some math, mental math, or go through and count every single seed that you currently have if you're one of those people who's bought a bunch of seeds, and then see how many do I pop per grow, how many grows do I do per year, and then math out how many years of seeds you have before you decide I'm going to buy 5, 10, 15. Because I got to that point, I was like, oh wait, I have 10 years worth of seeds. I need to start popping them now and growing them.
That's
and stop
what I'm
buying
saying.
them.
Yeah, they're just two totally different hobbies. I mean, you got your seed collection, and then you got the garden. Having a big seed collection makes it a lot easier to figure out what to grow in your garden, or harder, probably. I don't know, but
probably harder. But if you have the disposable income, I used to have like the option of like, oh, I've got this, blueberry tucked away. If I want a blueberry, I could pop that and maybe cross that. And I want to have it just in case I really want it someday. But I also, on the other end, this is the cheap home grow. I want people to save their money. And I've seen too many people in crisis situations where if they would have set money aside and had a savings account and had cash on hand, they'd be able to handle a medical emergency or a car crash or somebody passing.
Yeah,
that they can't pay for their funeral. And they're raising funeral costs by selling off their seed collection. It breaks my heart when I see that. Like, it's not a pretty situation. I've seen that a dozen plus times where people are like having to let go
Mhm.
of everything that and they're taking $1 to 10 on some of these packs. It's like they spent 100 on it and they might get 10, 15, 20, and they're having to go through bids and ship all this shit out, and doing that in the middle of a crisis is not the most fun.
Collecting things, yeah, is an expensive hobby. Whatever you're collecting, if you're collecting stamps, if you're collecting coins, if you're collecting like rare antique dolls or whatever you're collecting, yeah,
I'm
I
collecting
mean, I
hundreds,
agree.
Doc.
What's that?
I'm collecting hundreds.
Breaking
I
necks
wish
and
Like
I
cashing
was.
Benjamin.
I
checks,
wish I
Tao.
had a good
Cash,
collection.
collecting Benjamins.
Yeah, but I want to say, to me, it's like seeds have a certain inherited hope to them, because I always say to myself, there'll be a day when I have a piece of property that I could fucking get every single seed I have wet, and well, I guess I wouldn't do that though, because I probably even have too many that I could even care for at one time. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, and I've tried discouraging people to gifting me seeds, because I just don't know if I get to them. Then when you start breeding yourself, then that flips everything, because now you want to test the shit that you just made, and then I have the whole vault sitting over there, and to look at what I just made, I need to pop a whole bunch of my own shit. So then that takes up all the room, because I want to do a good, get a good sample size in. And yeah, so that's my take. But it's like hope. I always envision that time where I'm gonna have like that half acre where it's just like all different strains that I have in that seed vault right now, And it could happen. It will happen. That's all. You just gotta
I'll
make
say,
shit happen.
not to encourage people, as I was just encouraging people to save their money maybe, and if they've got enough seeds to just pop the ones they do have. Canobic Laboratories, Canomic, I don't know, CANNOMIC, I believe, on Instagram. They just released a like old seed popping kit. It's like a sterilized petri dish basically, and they showed like I think it was like a 15 popping. Should probably pop it up. I'll bring that up for maybe next week's show. But pretty cool stuff to look at. And I've seen some people like Caper Purple or Casper Purple in San Francisco doing like sterilized test tubes to pop. They did like a little bit of cocoa in the very bottom of it, and they'd like sterilize the test tube and give it just like a perfect amount of EC or whatever, just enough for it to get it to pop within that test tube. And they're having like 100% results across like thousands of seeds, like just crazy good results. So there's some interesting and cool technology, not that it needs to be overcomplicated, but with older seeds or vulnerable seeds or something like that, or extremely expensive, rare things like that, you might want to bring back that you've been collecting and maybe didn't get to
Jack,
popping.
I saw that post on IG and I looked on the website. I believe it's still a pre-order only, and it's like stupid expensive. Just
Okay.
so
Well,
to warn people, yeah.
How expensive do you remember, Tao?
I think it was $230. I'll pop it up right now. $230.
yeah, if their tissue culture stuff is pretty expensive too. If you're going to do it
Yeah.
yourself, you'll save some money, but you're getting the expertise, so you're kind of paying for it.
Right.
If you
I
really,
don't-
really
good
wanted to
point.
do it with something, my recommendation before that, depending on how many you have, scarification of the seed, like a matchbox with some whatever paper, the
Sandpaper?
like sandpaper. You shake it up in
Abrasive?
there.
Some sort of abrasive
Sandpaper.
material?
Yeah, sandpaper inside of a pen. I think Doc has said in the past, like in a pen tube, you
Just roll it
in there,
around
you
the
shake it up.
pen, and then you take a tube, you get your finger on the top of the bob, and you just shake it like that in the tube of a little square of sandpaper.
It works great because the old seeds are hard and the water doesn't want to penetrate as well. So you're just allowing pores for that water to penetrate in and then allowing it to crack. The other thing is I have a seed cracker from The Seed Cracker. It's made by a guy called Woodshed 13. 2020 Mendocino makes a little less expensive version. People have 3D printed them now. You could go buy like an acorn cracker or something on Amazon, but you just twist it, and then it makes a little pop. And there you go. You listen to it right next to your ear, because if you
Successfully done
twist
that,
it
yeah,
anymore, it
just
squishes.
Just with my thumb and index finger, like a seed that won't pop. It's been in water for like 3 days, and I'm about to just give up on it. You grab it along the hemisphere, basically, and yeah, in the seed popper where cracker works, so you can do it. I mean, with your fingers, it's a higher chance of screwing it up too with your fingers. But like, if you're gonna give up anyways, take it on the hemisphere and just kind of like squeeze it until you just kind of feel the hemisphere kind of like, the two edges of the shell pop away from each other, and then stop. Like you just want to kind of break that seal. Because oftentimes the little seedling just won't have enough energy to sort of break that. It won't, it gets too dried out. It doesn't imbibe properly or fully. And that can definitely help. But yeah, it's last ditch efforts, I always think.
Yeah, you can also use like they're called medical hemostats. It looks like a pair of scissors. They're used to like pinch things together. But even I saw somebody use a pair of scissors, so they went really slow at the little point in where like the scissors meet. And
I feel it. The only way you know when you've done it enough is like you actually like kind of feel it in your in like the seed popper. You can go so slowly, but like anything else, man, you got to get feedback because if you squeeze it anymore after that, you're just gonna crush the
it
little.
squishes it. Yeah. The one time just to test, like I had popped 15 of them, and every single time I heard the pop, I stopped. But then one time, just out of curiosity, I was like, what if I go one more little crank? And just this thing is like a threaded, basically a screw that goes down. So it's
Yeah.
very small threads, and one not even full turn, like a quarter, half turn extra after the pop killed the seed. And that was the only one out of the 15 that didn't pop the first time I tried it. So even with new seeds, I actually used to, just to get consistency, I popped every single one before I put it into the paper towel. And I was like, oh, I have this device. I might as well try and use it. And it was giving me great germination results, but I also get them without having to do that. But we're at the end of the show now, and I want to pass it around so everybody gets their time to get their final thoughts and shout outs in. So I'll pass it over first to Dr. MJ.
Hey, thank you. I had fun. It's always a fun show. So thanks, Jack, for kind of bringing us together each week to do this, the rest of the panelists. Everybody in chat, thank you guys always. You know, it's kind of like two shows going on at the same time. And the chat show is sometimes at least as entertaining as whatever we're talking about on air. So thanks to that. You know, I dropped a new video today on my channel. So go over to Dr. MJ Coco channel and check that out. Check us out over at cocoforcannabis.com. And yeah, I think I'll have another announcement to next week. And it's almost time to start planning for the spring autoflower challenge, which it starts on April 20th. And we've decided to do size matters this time, which is basically about sort of like how big is your grow space. So there's gonna be like a 2x2 group and a 4x4 group or whatever. But we're also going to do side challenges to grow the biggest auto and whoever grows the smallest auto for the size matters spring auto flower challenge. The smallest auto, you know, you might sort of back into that one. That might not be, you know, your initial goal when you start
Accidental entry.
challenge. Yeah, exactly. But the biggest auto, I think this will be a fun sort of like demonstration of, you know, for everybody that thinks autos need to be small little plants. So check that out or get ready to grow with us on April 20th. And yeah, it's been fun. Grow with love.
Cheers to April 20th. That's my wife and I's anniversary, 420, good date. Next up, we've got Matthew Gates.
Yeah, good chat, good discussion as always. If you're interested to learn more about pest abatement, there are a few ways you can do it. You can reach out to me professionally. You can check me out at zenthanol.com. You can also check me out on my YouTube channel, Zenthanol, where I'm posting a bunch of cool information and videos, a lot more lately. I have actually just dropped the second part of my first live stream of January with the Q&A section. So you go check it out. Lots of really great questions there. And you can also vote in my community tabs. I took a week break, but you can check me out there every week. We can vote on the live stream topic. So if you're interested in that, you can do that. You can also check me out at Twitter and Instagram at SyncAngel. And I look forward to our mutual success as always.
Good stuff. Big shout out to Twitter finally accepting legal cannabis sponsors to come on and advertise. So that lends to me to believe if you're in a legal state posting about your cannabis grows on Twitter, you will not be deleted like on Instagram and many of the other platforms, which makes it the first major social media platform to be doing that. So hats off to them. Shout out to them for that, because that's a big step forward. And I hope the other social media platforms will learn that it makes sense to allow cannabis to be, you know, posted and advertised on there because it's legal in most places. So cheers to them for doing that. Big ups. And next up, we got Noah the Grower.
Yeah, had a good show. Kept trying to get to end there. I wanted to say something, but there's a difference between collecting seeds and growing seeds, and there's a difference between smoking weed and growing weed. So we were talking earlier about the people that 99% of people that eat food don't grow. I bet you 99% of, if not more, of people that smoke weed don't grow weed. everybody listening to the show, or most people listening to the show, are most likely growers. Shout out to you. You guys are the 1%. Growing isn't easy. It's a lot of work. Like Doc said, you have to go to sleep. You have things you have to do, and you're gonna put your grow off. But keep going. It's a very useful skill. I love it. It's in my blood. My family. I come from farmers, so my uncle told me it's in your blood, and my grandma was a big flower grower, and yeah, I love this stuff. I'm very passionate about it. I like to be around other people that are. All you guys in the panel, shout out to you, and shout out to everyone listening, because if you're listening to a growing show, most likely you're a grower. You're interested in growing. Keep it going. Keep the flame alive. I'm no other grower. You can catch me out there, and I'll see you guys all next week.
Thank you, Noah. Always a pleasure to have you, man. You inspire me every time, especially you wrap it up nicely in a perfect bow. A man of few words, but when you do get them out there, it's always very great discussion. And thank you again for that inspiration there at the end. Great stuff. And I agree with all of what you guys were talking about. And last and certainly not least, we've got the American one of the panelists.
Hello, Jack. Thanks again for hosting. You always do a bang up job. Awesome. And it's good to see everyone on the panel. And yeah, it's missing out on ETG and Brandon and Kyle. I hope all them guys are doing good, and good to see everyone in chat. Sorry I wasn't more active in there, but I was in there seeing everybody. Thanks for coming and hanging out. And yeah, I'm the American one on YouTube, the American one _ Keens on the IG. You can hit me up if you want to get some beans or just want to hit me up and ask me something. And yeah, have a great week, everyone. Catch you next week.
Thank you as always, Tal, and appreciate the shout outs to the panelists who aren't with us tonight. Happy birthday to Kyle, and look forward to seeing Brandon and Aaron when they can get back with us. And shout out to all the people in Oklahoma listening and everywhere else. I want to give Smart Poker, we'll go a few minutes over because Smart Poker is such a long-time listener and loyal fan and a great person. I just got to answer this question. So cheers to you, Smart Poker. They ask, should one harvest a CBD strain early, parentheses, say week 6 or 7, for optimal CBD content, or is that bullshit? And this is when I have some specific insight, because living in California, there was a pretty good CBD market. Wayne Laughter of House of Harlequin, the guy who found the Harlequin, big CBD producer, said it was a 32-1 CBD to THC when they harvested it earlier. I want to say it was about week 6. And if they waited a few more weeks, that particular strain would go as high as a 4-1 at like week 11. So the later they pushed it, the more THC there was. And each week it would about, he said about half. So like 34-1 to like a 17-1 to
what
like.
What were the actual percentages of like the CBD though? When was that CBD going down the whole time and THC coming up, or was it
THC
just
was
that
going
THC
up.
was coming
So
up so
I think it was
strong?
like a 15% to like a 0.5%, and then 15% to 1%, for example. And like the CBD would probably end at like 17%, and the THC was ending at like 4 or 5 or something like that. And so it was more
the
close
CBD
to a
burning up?
1-to-1.
Like at week 6 when they harvested it, was that like 20%? What was that CBD percentage?
It'd be like 15 or 16%, I think. I don't know how super high it was.
Okay.
Some of the
So
stuff
it's
is like,
just the ratio that you're improving. It's not the actual yield of CBD.
and some strains are like true 30-1s. It'll be a 30% THC and like 1% CBD, or the other way around, 30% CBD and 1% THC type thing. So depending on the genetic lineage,
Right.
the ratio would tend to, if there is any amount of THC, it's going to linger up a little bit towards the end. So like if you're a hemp farmer, for example, you want to harvest a little bit on the early end to avoid that THC spike, to avoid testing hot and then having your stuff not test as
Right.
hemp.
But if you're just looking to harvest CBD because CBD is good medicine for you,
You can push it.
You can push it, right? Because it's not necessarily lowering the CBD as it gets older. The THC is just coming up, and that makes the ratio change, but you're not losing CBD. I think that's an important sort of,
Very
different
important, I
people will
agree.
make that decision differently based on that knowledge.
Exactly. And the one
Yeah.
thing that happens really is CBDA on the plant does turn to CBD, just pure CBD, which happens when inhaled or decarboxylated and things like that, just like THCA to THC. So it's something to be considered, but I wouldn't worry about pushing it further unless like you're testing for like hemp, which is, I would imagine Smart Poker in this case wouldn't be. Most people listening to the show, if they're growing CBD, it's because they just want a good healthy dose of CBD. So shout out to you, Smart Poker. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that on next week's show. But if you want to find me, I'm at Jack Greenstock. That predominantly on Instagram, but I should change it to Jack_Greenstock because that's my Twitter name. I'm like verified and shit now. I paid the little fee or whatever, so my replies actually show up, and I want to support a company that supports cannabis users. So I'm put my money where my mouth is on that one. And it's a main site and it's not too expensive. So shout out to them. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Jack Greensock signing out.
Grow with love, everyone.
Keep growing.